When two officers arrested her, they had no idea they'd face her again. This time in court as the judge deciding their fate. It was a sunny afternoon in Fort Collins, Colorado. The park was alive with the sound of children playing, joggers pacing along the trail, and families picnicking under the shade of tall oak trees. Amid this bustling yet peaceful scene, a black woman sat on a bench near the pond, a thick hardcover book resting on her lap. Her name was Camille, a well-respected attorney. Taking a rare moment to escape her demanding schedule, she was immersed in her reading when the sharp screech of tires broke her concentration. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb, catching the attention of a few onlookers. Two officers stepped out, their expressions stern. Radiating authority, their eyes immediately locked onto Camille, the only person sitting alone in the vicinity. May we speak with you for a moment?" One officer called out, his voice carrying an air of suspicion rather than concern. Camille glanced up from her book, her calm demeanor unwavering. "Of course," she replied, closing the book carefully. The second officer stepped closer, his tone clipped. "We got a call about some suspicious activity in the area. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Camille raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. "Suspicious activity? I'm just sitting here reading." She held up the book as if to prove her point, but their scrutiny didn't waver. "Can we see some ID?" the first officer demanded. Her pulse quickened, but she remained composed. "I don't understand. What's the reason for this?" "It's routine," the second officer said, though his tone implied otherwise. The small crowd that had gathered began to murmur. Some looked curious, while others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sensing the imbalance in the interaction, Camille sighed and reached into her bag, pulling out her wallet as she handed over her driver's license. One officer took it, scanning the information with unnecessary intensity. "Camille Johnson," he read aloud, almost mockingly. "What's your business here?" "Miss Johnson." Camille inhaled deeply, trying to keep her patience intact. "I live in this city. I came here to enjoy the park." "Is that a problem?" The officer's lips tightened. "We'll see." He handed her ID back. But instead of walking away, they continued to linger, asking questions that felt less like routine and more like an interrogation. "Do you always carry a book like that around?" One officer sneered. "Are you alone here, or waiting for someone?" The other added, his hand resting on his belt in an unmistakably deliberate gesture. Camille had handled countless tense situations in courtrooms, but this was different. The power dynamic was stark, and their tone carried an edge she recognized all too well. Still, she chose her words carefully. "I'm not answering any more questions unless you tell me what I'm being accused of," she said firmly. Her refusal seemed to trigger something in them. The first officer stepped forward. "Don't get smart with us," he snapped. "We're just doing our job, and I know the law." Camille replied, her voice steady. "I'm not breaking it by sitting in a public park." But reason was not on their agenda. The first officer reached for her arm. "You're resisting," he said, though Camille hadn't moved. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed, startled. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. A man pulled out his phone to record the scene. "Stop resisting," the officer repeated louder, this time as if performing for the growing audience. Camille's heart raced as she felt the cold metal of handcuffs snap around her wrists. She tried to stay calm, even as humiliation and frustration burned in her chest. The officers led her toward their cruiser, ignoring the questions from onlookers. Camille turned her head toward the crowd, locking eyes with a young woman holding up her phone. For a moment, there was an unspoken exchange, a silent plea to document the injustice unfolding. But as the car door slammed shut, Camille knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Inside the cramped back seat of the police cruiser, Camille's mind raced. She had spent years defending clients, standing up for justice and navigating the legal system. But now she was on the other side of it. The absurdity of the situation struck her, but there was no humor in it, only anger. The ride to the station was suffocatingly silent, save for the crackle of the police radio. Camille stared out the window, her reflection merging with the passing scenery. Her wrists ached from the cuffs digging into her skin. At the station, things only got worse. The booking process was invasive, humiliating, and designed to strip her of her dignity. She was fingerprinted, photographed, and led to a small holding cell with fluorescent lights that buzzed relentlessly. "Enjoy your stay," one of the officers said smugly as he shut the cell door. Camille sat on a cold bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She replayed the events at the park over and over in her mind. How had such a peaceful moment spiraled into this? The answer was as clear as it was bitter prejudice. Hours passed before anyone acknowledged her again. A young officer approached the cell holding a clipboard. "Miss Johnson, you've been charged with resisting arrest and obstructing a peace officer," he said flatly. "On what grounds?" Camille asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "You can discuss that in court," he replied before turning away. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to think strategically. The charges were flimsy and she knew it. But she also knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. Cases like hers rarely were. Eventually, Camille was released on bail. As she walked out of the station, the cool night air hit her like a wave, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. She spotted her colleague and friend, Marissa, waiting by the curb. "Camille," Marissa rushed over her face, a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you okay?" Camille nodded, though her body betrayed her with a slight tremor. "I'm fine," she said, though the word felt hollow. As they drove away, Marissa kept glancing at her, waiting for her to speak. Finally, Camille broke the silence. "I'm not letting this slide, Marissa. Not this time." Marissa's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I'm tired of this happening," Camille replied. "I have the tools, the knowledge, and the resources to fight back, and I will." That night, Camille sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by legal pads and open books. She worked tirelessly, outlining a civil rights lawsuit against the officers and the department. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from a simmering determination. As the days turned into weeks, the community began to rally around her. The video of her arrest, shared by the young woman in the park, had gone viral. People from all walks of life reached out with messages of support, sharing their own stories of injustice. Camille's resolve grew stronger with every email, every phone call, every comment. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had been silenced, humiliated, or dismissed. But even as she prepared for the courtroom battle, she couldn't predict the moment when justice would take an unexpected turn. The weeks following Camille's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions. Relentless work. Her law firm was initially hesitant, worried that her public case might overshadow their carefully cultivated reputation. But Camille didn't flinch. She explained calmly but firmly that this fight wasn't just about her. It was about setting a precedent. The viral video had done more than spread her story. It had sparked conversations across the city and beyond. The footage of Camille, calm yet defiant as the officers forcibly led her away, became a symbol of resilience in the face of injustice. Reporters began calling, asking for interviews. But Camille turned them all down. She wasn't interested in media attention. Her focus was laser-sharp, building a case that would not only hold the officers accountable, but also expose the systemic flaws that allowed such behavior to persist. At night, though, when the world went quiet, the weight of the situation crept in. She replayed the arrest in her mind, the dismissive tone, the handcuffs, the murmurs of the crowd. She thought about how easily things could have escalated further. The thought made her stomach churn, but it also fueled her determination. One evening, as she sifted through her research, Marissa stopped by with takeout. Camille barely looked up from her laptop as Marissa placed the food on the table. "You've been at this for hours," Marissa said gently. "I don't have a choice," Camille replied without missing a beat. Marissa sat across from her, studying her face. "You know, this is bigger than just a legal battle, right? People are looking to you now." Camille closed her laptop, finally meeting her friend's gaze. "I know," she said, her voice steady. "That's why I can't afford to lose." Her preparation was meticulous. She combed through similar cases, pulling precedents and gathering evidence to dismantle the officer's claims. She enlisted the help of trusted colleagues, building a legal team that shared her passion for justice. But it wasn't just about the courtroom. Camille also made it a point to engage with the community. She attended town halls, listened to others who had experienced similar injustices, and even spoke at a local college about the importance of accountability. One afternoon, while walking to her car after a meeting, a stranger approached her. "Miss Johnson," the woman asked hesitantly. "Yes, I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice cracking. "For standing up to them, for standing up for all of us." Camille felt her throat tighten. She managed a small smile. "I'm just doing what I can." The community's support was a double-edged sword. It empowered her, but it also heightened the pressure. She couldn't let them down. Then one day her attorney called with news. The officer she was suing had filed a motion to dismiss the case. Camille expected as much. It was a standard move to delay the process. But as her attorney explained the next steps, she froze. "Camille," he said cautiously, "you should know something else. You've been assigned as the judge for one of their cases next month." The irony was staggering. Camille leaned back in her chair, processing the revelation. She had spent weeks preparing to fight these officers in court, and now fate had handed her an entirely different kind of justice. For a moment, she wondered if she could do it, if she could sit on that bench and remain impartial. But then she thought about everything they had put her through, about the people depending on her to make a stand. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was an opportunity to show what real justice looked like. The courtroom was buzzing with quiet murmurs as people filed in, finding their seats. The case was nothing particularly high profile. An internal misconduct hearing involving two officers accused of excessive force in an unrelated incident. To most, it was just another day in the justice system. The two officers, Carter and Daniels, sat at the defendant's table, wearing their uniforms like armor. They leaned toward each other, speaking in low tones, their expressions indifferent, almost bored to them. This was routine. Another hurdle to clear, another case to brush aside. Then the door to the judge's chambers opened, and the room fell silent. Camille stepped onto the bench, her black robe flowing behind her. She moved with purpose, her expression calm yet commanding. As she took her seat, she glanced toward the defendants. The reaction was immediate. Officer Carter's face drained of color, his eyes widening in shock. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening as he struggled to process what he was seeing. It was her, the woman they had humiliated and arrested at the park. Camille allowed a brief pause, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. Then in a clear, steady voice she began the proceedings. "This court is now in session. Please be seated." The officers sat stiffly, their composure faltering. Carter whispered something to their lawyer, who nodded but kept his focus on Camille. For the first time in weeks, Camille felt the upper hand. But she knew this wasn't about revenge. Her job as a judge demanded impartiality, and she would uphold that standard. Still, the irony wasn't lost on her or anyone else in the room. As the attorneys presented their opening arguments, Camille maintained her professionalism, listening intently and taking notes. But every so often her gaze would flicker toward the officers. She could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their hands fidgeted slightly during a recess. Carter and Daniel stepped into the hallway, their voices low but agitated. "How is she?" the judge, Carter hissed, his frustration barely contained. "This has to be a setup," Daniels muttered, shaking his head. "It's not a setup." Their lawyer interjected, "It's a coincidence. And you need to stay focused. She's not the enemy here, your actions are." But the officers weren't listening. They were too consumed by the surreal nature of their predicament. When court resumed, Camille remained composed, ensuring the hearing proceeded fairly and efficiently. Yet her presence alone seemed to unsettle the defendants. Every time she addressed them, they shifted in their seats, their confidence eroding little by little. At one point during witness testimony, Camille caught Carter stealing a glance at her. His expression wasn't defiance, it was something closer to regret, as if he was beginning to understand the gravity of what they had done. By the end of the day, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Camille adjourned the hearing, her gavel striking with finality. "We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m., she announced. As the room emptied, Camille lingered at her bench organizing her notes. She could feel the weight of the officers' stares as they hesitated by the door, clearly debating whether to approach her. In the end, they didn't. They left quietly, their steps heavy with the realization that this was far from over. But for Camille, the real challenge wasn't in the irony of the moment. It was in the decisions that would follow and whether justice could truly prevail. The courtroom was packed the next morning. News of the unexpected twist had spread, drawing a larger crowd than usual for a misconduct hearing. Some were there out of curiosity, others to support Camille. Though they knew her role as the judge meant she couldn't show favoritism. Camille entered with the same calm, composed demeanor, her robe flowing as she ascended to the bench. The attorneys wasted no time diving into their arguments. The prosecutor methodically laid out evidence against the officers, presenting testimony from the victim of the excessive force incident. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "the officers' actions were not just a lapse in judgment, they were a blatant abuse of power. Their behavior reflects a pattern of disregard for the very people they are sworn to protect." Camille nodded, taking in every word, her pen gliding across her notepad. Her focus was unshakable, even as the defendant shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. The defense attorney rose to counter, his tone measured but strained. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the incident in question, we argue that the situation escalated due to factors beyond the officers' control. Their intent was not malicious, and we believe this case lacks sufficient grounds for punitive measures." As the arguments continued, Camille couldn't ignore the parallels between this case and her own experience. The excuses, the justifications. It was all too familiar. Yet she pushed her personal feelings aside, determined to let the facts guide her. When it was time for witness cross-examination, the tension in the room deepened. The prosecutor called the victim to the stand, a young man named Ethan. His voice trembled as he recounted the night he was tackled to the ground by the officers during a routine traffic stop. "They didn't even give me a chance to explain," Ethan said, his eyes darting nervously between the attorneys and the officers. "It felt like they decided I was guilty before I even opened my mouth." The prosecutor pressed further. "And did you resist their orders at any point?" "No," Ethan replied firmly. "I was scared, but I did everything they said." It didn't matter, they had already made up their minds. The room was silent as the defense attorney stood to cross-examine. He tried to poke holes in Ethan's testimony, but the young man held his ground. Camille watched intently, her expression unreadable. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The defendants were called to testify. Officer Carter was the first to take the stand. He glanced nervously at Camille as he swore the oath, his voice shaky as he answered the prosecutor's questions. "Officer Carter," the prosecutor began, "you've been accused of using excessive force in this incident. Can you explain your actions that night?" Carter hesitated, his gaze darting toward Daniels before answering. "I thought the situation was escalating. I made a judgment call, and do you believe your actions were justified?" Carter shifted in his seat. "At the time, yes. But looking back, I could have handled it differently." The prosecutor pressed on. "Handled it differently how?" "By not tackling an unarmed, compliant individual to the ground." Carter opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence spoke volumes. When it was Daniel's turn to testify, his demeanor was similarly strained. His attempts to justify his actions only deepened the prosecutor's case, highlighting the officer's inability to take accountability. Camille listened closely, her face betraying no emotion. But inside she felt a mixture of frustration and pity. These men had been given authority, yet they wielded it recklessly, leaving a trail of harm in their wake. As the day wore on, it became clear that the evidence against the officers was overwhelming. The prosecutor's closing argument was powerful, urging the court to set a precedent that abuse of power would not be tolerated. When the defense delivered its closing statement, it was clear they were grasping at straws. Their arguments lacked conviction, and even the officers seemed resigned to the likely outcome. Camille adjourned the hearing, her voice steady, as she announced that a ruling would be delivered the following week. As the courtroom emptied, Carter and Daniels lingered near the exit, their faces pale and drawn. For the first time, they seemed to grasp the gravity of their actions and the reality of what awaited them. But justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about accountability, change, and ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. A week later, the courtroom was silent as Camille entered to deliver her ruling. Every seat was filled, the tension almost tangible. Reporters lined the back wall, their pens poised to capture every word. This was no longer just a case about two officers. It had become a symbol of a larger fight for justice and accountability. Camille's voice was calm but firm as she began. The role of law enforcement is to protect and serve the community with integrity, respect, and fairness. When those entrusted with this responsibility abuse their power, it erodes public trust and causes harm far beyond the immediate victim. This case has laid bare the consequences of such actions. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. Carter and Daniel sat at the defense table, their heads bowed. The weight of her words was unmistakable. The evidence presented has demonstrated that officers Carter and Daniels acted with unnecessary force, disregarding the protocols they were sworn to uphold. Their actions were not only unjustified, but indicative of a troubling pattern that must be addressed. Camille outlined the consequences: mandatory suspension without pay, participation in extensive retraining programs, and a formal disciplinary record that would follow them. The ruling was firm but fair, striking a balance between accountability and the opportunity for reform. When she finished, Camille closed the case with a decisive gavel strike. "This court is adjourned." The officers stood, their expression somber as they prepared to leave. Before exiting, Carter hesitated and turned to Camille. "Your Honor," he began, his voice barely audible, "I'm sorry. It wasn't enough to undo the harm, but it was a start." Camille nodded, acknowledging his words without offering absolution. True change, she knew, would come through actions, not apologies. As the courtroom emptied, Camille remained seated, taking a moment to reflect. She had seen justice served, but the victory felt bittersweet. For every case like this, countless others went unspoken, unresolved. Later that evening, Camille attended a community meeting at a local recreation center. The room was filled with people eager to share their stories, their frustrations, their hopes. As she listened, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. One older woman approached her after the meeting, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you," she said, gripping Camille's hand tightly. "What you did in that courtroom. It means the world to us." Camille smiled softly. "This is just the beginning. We have so much more work to do." The following week saw meaningful conversations between community leaders, law enforcement, and local activists. Camille used her platform to advocate for reforms, emphasizing the need for transparency and accountability in policing. The case had sparked a ripple effect, not just in Fort Collins but across the state. People began demanding change, pushing for policies that prioritize fairness and equality. For Camille, the journey isn't about personal vindication. It was about ensuring that others wouldn't have to endure what she had. The fight for justice was ongoing, but moments like this reminded her that change, though slow, was possible. As she stood on the steps of the courthouse one afternoon, watching a group of young activists gather for a peaceful rally, she felt a sense of hope. The system wasn't perfect, but with enough voices it could be pushed toward progress. And that, she thought, is the kind of justice worth fighting for? If you believe in the power of accountability and change, subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire action and reflection. Let's work together to make the world a fairer place.